You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specialising in content acquisition, strategy, research and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights.
Hello and welcome to Inside Content. I'm Toby Russell, CEO of 3Vision. This is the last episode of the podcast before our summer break, and I'm joined by Matt Creasey, EVP of Sales, Co-Productions and Acquisitions at Banijay Rights. In this episode, we cover a wide range of topics from across the industry, diving into some of the main evolutions in the content space we've seen in the past few years. We explore the opportunities in some of Banijay's key markets, including the US, Canada, Asia, Pacific and LATAM. And we talk about the latest trends in co-productions and co-commissions, progress in the digital market, as well as the impact of AI on the business so far. Hi Matt, thanks for joining me again on Inside Content.
Hi Toby, nice to see you again.
So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. You last came on the podcast in November 2020, if you can believe that. And I think we can probably agree that a lot has happened in the industry since then. So to kick off, let's focus a bit on the US market where you're based, obviously. I'm interested to hear your views on what the opportunities for international content being sold into the US look like right now.
Thanks very much, Toby. It's really nice to be back here again after, God, I can't believe it's 4 years. And as you say, a lot has changed in those 4 years for sure. So yeah, the US market has gone through quite a maelstrom of events in the last 2 years, I would say. And we're maybe seeing other parts of the world beginning to sort of catch up to where the US has been. And that's been a combination of mega M&A activity with Warner Brothers Discovery and maybe the knock-on effect of failed M&A activity, which is the current situation with Paramount Global. But I say all of that because and the writers' strike, of course, on top of that, and a slowdown in terms of commissioning in the US as the streamers have shifted from that sort of war of just getting as much content in as possible to more now looking at straight profits, which has sort of pulled the skids on the volume of international content that certainly they've been bringing in. So all of that's to say that there has been an impact on international in the US. So the main impact, I would say it's probably across, I'll talk about scripted first of all, in the streaming spaces, which is where the majority of the international content has been sold to in the last few years, with exceptions like HBO for the occasional show and PBS and Masterpiece Theatre being other really prime examples. But predominantly we're looking at streaming world. The most simple current analysis of that market is that the buyers have contracted. And we've seen that the buyers themselves contract through various reasons. And it may be through financial situations and necessities or changes in ownership. So, for example, we see what used to be HBO Max and now Max, very, very little opportunity there now for international co-production, at least, and even acquisitions as well, as they've centered more on their own IP and their own development. Amazon have spent a lot of money, so they're very, very choosy about what they look at now. Netflix don't really want to be in the Netflix game, in the co-production game like they used to before, because they prefer to look at second window content, mostly therefore coming from the US rather than international. And of course, they're getting their international content fueled by their local commissions in local markets. So I'm just specifically talking about the US here. It's not necessarily true of Netflix internationally. But because behind the scenes as well is that marketing dollars have been cut to a degree. And with that, the marketing dollars are going to be focused on their big new originals, their big IP, their new IP, and they don't want to be spending money on marketing on shows which they consider riskier content. And that is invariably international content. So they prefer to pick up something which is well known, so there's less marketing to be done. Now, there's exceptions to that rule. Of course, there always is. But generally, that's just how we're sort of seeseeing it. And we've seen Showtime, who were a really interesting company, both as a TV and then when they moved over to P+. But again, that's contracted massively as well. Paramount Plus is massively contracted or non-existent at the moment because of all the travails around their ownership and just budget cuts there. And I could go on, so whereas before we took out scripted early stages for co-production opportunities or enhanced pre-sale opportunities, and we would maybe end up with 3 or 4 pitches on a specific show, depending on the type of show it was. We've seen that really, really, really lower in the last 18 months. So it's been a tricky period, to tell you the truth. It has been tricky.
So it's making the life of the distributor, co-production executive quite a lot more difficult then. It's, to try and find homes for those projects.
Yeah, I think we're lucky in a company like Banijay has scale, and with that, our producers, and we work with a lot of third-party producers as well, again, in the drama space. I can talk more about non-scripted in a bit. But because of that, we have a very diversified slate of content. And with that, it does open up for us, which we were already doing, but it's the importance of the worlds of the PBSs of this world and the Masterpieces and BritBox and Sundance Now, all of those people who we've partnered with for many, many years and have very good relationships with. But there are important shows that are equally done for those networks as well, which may be even more suited to those. So while we've seen it maybe with some shows that we would have maybe taken out to the maxes of this world, we're still able to find good homes for really good content. And case in point is we're doing working with Playground in the US for the full follow-up with Masterpiece Theatre, which is Damian Lewis and Mark Rylance, for example. We are doing the new seasons of Grantchester, which has been already picked up. We've got, these sort of dramas coming through are very, 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 very strong for us as well. And, even today it's just been announced that Lions, our show through Mamtor, has been picked up by HBO. So there are exceptions to the rule, and you have to sort of dust yourself down and find opportunities and keep working away at it. But we have very deep relationships, and the creative we have is very strong, and it just might take longer, and we might take shows out at different stages before. And it also leads into how the shows are financed as well, which I think maybe is something we'll talk about at some point.
Yeah, and do you think there was quite a lot of interest a little while ago about non-English language content, and kind of the new opportunities that some of the streaming services were potentially providing there. Do you is that I think it's probably questionable whether that was actually a kind of correct analysis, and so I'm interested in your views on that, and then whether that kind of part of the marketplace is changing as well.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment, that it's a question of whether it was ever as big as people were talking about. I think for quite a few years I spoke about this on various panels if I was invited onto them, and this would come up. And yes, there were some great examples of some non-English that got picked up in the US in the last decade on some prominent platforms or broadcasters. So I think HBO might have done a couple of Scandinavian ones, and certainly people like AMC and Sundance Channel did, some really big ones like Deutschland 83 and those shows like that. So they certainly felt that there was some, for really premium non-English, there was homes for sure, no question. But if you look at the volume as opposed to actually where those amazing deals were done, it was still, it was still not as common as people maybe like to think. So the business still was non-English to certain platforms, and that continues to be the case. I think we work a lot with the first non-English streamer in the US, which has run for a long time now, which is now owned by Kino Lorber and has just bought Topic, for example. But MHC, we've worked with them for years now. They've been consistent buyers at a certain level across a very wide range of non-English. So they've stayed in the market, but we've also seen other players come into the market and just not succeed. The most recent being Viaplay is the prime example, where Viaplay came in to great fanfare talking about Nordic content for the US, exclusive SVOD, which was already going to be an uphill struggle to get eyeballs, because if there was good Scandinavian or Nordic content already in the US, it had already been either commissioned by Netflix anyway out of the territory, or it had been sold to other broadcasters, because Nordic drama had already been in the US. So to create a service which was exclusive to Nordic drama when other Nordic shows were already in the marketplace seemed a bit of heavy lifting, and it didn't last more than a year. And now I think it's a channel maybe on one of the Amazon channels as a fast channel, I think. And people like Acorn have dipped their toes into it and picked up some non-English. Sundance Now have been active over many years, and that was why I thought it was very challenging for Nordics, because these platforms had done. But I'd say if there's a non-English where you've got more chance of really punching through, it's probably Spanish language. The Spanish language coming up from Mexico, especially, that's where we see opportunities as well. So yes, there is a market, and we do put quite a bit of non-English content into the US. It could be either through those Spanish sister companies from the Mexican companies like the Univisions, or the platforms like VIX, etc. So that's where we see that, or we see other European drama coming into the marketplace across some of the streamers, really. But so there are homes, but it's I think there was a time when people were talking about really big numbers and what they thought the market value was, and I don't think it ever was that, and it's definitely not now. But we do a lot of non-English ourselves, and we are working with people on finding homes for it.
Yeah. No, we've done some we've done some research on that space, and we should probably look at doing that more. So I think it'd be interesting to really understand, the percentage of shows that are non-English that are actually finding homes in the US and other markets, and also kind of try to quantify, if they're finding a home, what kind of value are they actually achieve.
And I think with the Netflix is almost a bit of an anomaly as well, because, and look, I've got no data on this, but it's a hunch, is that the non-English shows that they have on the service, which they've got through all their multiple production commissions around the world, I wonder how many in the US are actually watched in the original language, because of course the requirement on Netflix is that you have to deliver all these different versions and languages for their global network. So how many people actually are watching them as non-English shows in the US, or are they just using the English dub?
Yeah, exactly.
But subtitle programming, the homes I see here on streaming MHZ, Amazon through their channels will have some non-English. PBS, I think, are working with the guys from the UK who've got the deal with Channel 4. Sorry, my memory forgets the name of the company. But they do some as well. And then there's sort of a bit picked up by people like, obviously MHC is 100% that, and Acorn and Sundance pick up a few pieces here and there. But I think as people become more risk averse is foreign.
So, Matt, let's just talk a little bit about the digital market. Maybe focusing initially on the US, and I'm using that digital word very broadly, and probably not technically correctly, but to kind of cover fast, cover AVOD, cover YouTube, the kind of Amazon PVD market. What's happening there is that there's lots of hype and excitement around fast in particular, but I think there's a lot of interesting activity in all those kind of segments of that space. What's your experiences about what's working there, what isn't working? Is that market growing? Is it going to become more significant?
Yeah, it's very exciting space, and it's a space that we have been very active in from the really early days. So if I sort of break up those different disciplines as you were just describing, in the AVOD space, we were very, very early adopters working with the big, what have now becoming more global AVOD suppliers. So Tubi, Roku, Pluto, we've been there from pretty much day one. So we have thousands of hours of content on those services, plus many, many more of the new services, from Samsung to LG, from Peacock to CW even we're doing recently. But we work very actively in the AVOD space. When you have a library like ourselves with over 180,000 hours, AVOD is an absolute godsend in terms of creating this new platforms for us. Well, not new so much, but for us to be able to exploit this content. And this content does very well. So it's a terrific opportunity. So AVOD is really important to us. We're working obviously with those platforms, but in each individual territory around the world as well, we're also working with local services which have launched as well. So AVOD, we are supplying thousands of hours each year of new content onto those platforms with all the content that we already have on there. So AVOD, I see continually growing, and I see some of the players really becoming more and more sophisticated in the services that they're offering as well. So AVOD is very, very important to us. US is the biggest market for us, but we're seeing great growth in places like Australia and the UK and in Latin America on these services, Canada as well. So we're really seeing the growth of AVOD, and we are firmly behind it, and we run quite a machine actually in terms of how we work with our AVOD partners to deliver the content. On FAST, again, we've been extremely active in that space from very early on, and I'm not sure of the latest numbers, but by the end of this year we would have syndicated 300 channels, of which we'll have almost 30 original channels. So we do channels they could be single title channels like Mr. Bean or MasterChef Universe, those Deal or No Deal, those type of channels, or we actually curate our own reality channel or a factual channel or a detective channel. So we play in both sets of space. So it's something we're extremely active. Again, the US is the biggest market, but we are growing very rapidly across the world. We have channels, and it could be a channel in France with purely French content on a particular title. So the beauty of Banijay with all of our production companies and all of this content within the individual territories, we are in a very good place for continually to grow fast. So we see it as an excellent space to be in, and in sort of parallel with our AVOD, the two work very, very well together actually. And it's interesting with some platforms fast works really well and the AVOD less, and then vice versa in others. It's quite an interesting space in terms of how it works.
Yeah, and then how about YouTube?
Yeah, so self-publishing again is something which is really important to us. So our self-publishing, and we have a whole team in London of editors, and we are self-publishing across Amazon PVD, Freevee, well, as long as Freevee is still called Freevee, but Amazon PVD, although of course they officially say it still is, we'll see. YouTube, Facebook is very, very important business for us. And within that as well, the self-publishing, that includes full episodes, or we're doing a lot of clipping as well. And we're working specifically with talent, where we're clipping specific pieces of talent content. So we're working a lot in the comedy space with talent from our shows like Would I Lie to You and 8 out of 10 Cats and 8 out of 10 Cats. So that's a really important space for us. So we're working with people like Jimmy Carr, for example, where we do a lot of the self-publishing for him. Sarah Milligan, the comedian. There's content across all of this type of area as well. So that's an area which is really valuable as well, but an area we keep expanding into. So the Amazon PVD world, and just this machine that we have in terms of what we're delivering every month, and it's very sophisticated. I sit in these meetings every week of what the next tranche of programming is going on, and we're very thorough when we go around the whole world of availabilities and rights and what can we publish, etc. So we've really got it down to a good level, and the revenues are fabulous, every month from the self-publishing as well. So again, these are really important areas of the business for us, and we see them as a very exciting part of the business. It's not replacing everything else we do, but it's opened up these new strands in the last, with AVOD 10 years, but self-publishing and fast in the last few years, which is exciting for a company like us with the deep well of content that we have, but then also being creative with that on top.
So I guess if we look back 10 years, compare then with now, would it be right to say that there's a lot greater proportion of your content is actually kind of getting out there to potential viewers?
Yeah, totally. And we're scratching the surface still to a degree. I mean, there's a lot of content that's out there, but in all libraries, there's going to be content that isn't necessarily cleared, or there's content that we maybe 10 years ago would have been okay, but standards and practices have changed, with duty of care and reality. And do we want some of those reality shows that were produced a few years ago? Are they right in the contemporary world? So we're careful in what we put up. We don't just throw things up. There's also, we learn all the time by what works and what doesn't work. And, there's method to what's happening. Now, of course, there's always anomalies. There's shows which pop for a couple of months where you just sort of, you celebrate the win, and you think, how on earth did that show particularly pop? And it might be a piece of talent in it that's been recognized from somewhere else, and an algorithm helps, etc. So those sort of shows where you have a deep library and there's talent associated with them can suddenly flare up. But it's it's a fascinating new world, and I suppose what it's really proved to us, and I think you've seen this with the big old network shows that continually find audiences all the time. I mean, Suits is obviously the obvious example recently on Netflix, but this isn't people who, I remember this when I was watching it in the 80s and the 90s, I'm going to rewatch it. This is new audience. This is a completely new audience. So I think that's really fascinating for us. I mean, the array of type of shows that do really well for us is really interesting mix. It's a very, very interesting mix of content. So that whole area for us is fascinating. And what it means is that when we're negotiating rights on linear deals or SVOD deals, license fee deals, depending on the level of those fees, we're much more, and we've always been very diligent about rights and terms of rights, and we've got an amazing rights team and rights systems that allow us to be really detailed in this. But it's more important than ever that we are really careful about the rights. So when someone says, we want all rights and we're going to pay you this, it's like, that's not the value anymore. And invariably people are paying less for those all rights situations or multiple rights. So we dissect those rights to make sure that at some point that we have opportunities earlier than before to be able to exploit them ourselves. So the broadcasters can't just take everything now and have holdbacks, unless they pay for them.
Got you. Great. That's really, really interesting. Let's move on and talk about some other other markets around the world, because your remit covers quite a wide range of regions. Could you give us a kind of quick summary of the market status in LATAM and in the kind of Asia Pacific region?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start out in sort of Australia, New Zealand, then into Asia. So it's funny, the countries that have been so sort of stable in their TV markets for many years, while we've seen sort of issues in the US and Europe for sure, but certainly Australia, we're seeing still remains an incredible market for us, both in production and distribution. But even there, you've seen, there's challenges in the market. There's no question that Network 10 there and Paramount Plus, again, on the back of what's been happening in the US with Paramount, it's very challenging for us, and that's a big home for us for content. BBC First has walked away or haven't been able to agree a carriage deal with Foxtel, and that's a major channel that's going to disappear in the market. So, and you've seen at network level, it's all about cutting costs. Everybody's trying to cut costs. So we're having to navigate that, of course. But where we see in Australia and New Zealand, we're very, very active in there as well. We produce a lot in Australia, our own show. So a lot of content goes to us, to New Zealand and simulcast or close to simulcast. So we have that sort of business going. A lot of UK content in Australia and into New Zealand. And we're talking hundreds of hours each year, from high-end drama through to the big factual space does very well there. So it's a very, very important market for us, and ANZ combined together, very important markets for us. But, challenges nonetheless. And we've seen it in New Zealand as well. There's been Warner Brothers Discovery, there's been pullbacks on commissions and formats there. And again, costs are being cut. So that is something which we're aware of. In Asia, Asia, as you know, is not just one group of a country, so each one is very different. So really for us, the format business is very important for us across the region. We produce a lot in India, and that's well known, but we're working with a spin-off from our Indian company called Creasia in setting up production all around Asia, from in Southeast Asia, from Thailand to Philippines to Indonesia. Big brand shows. We're working very heavily in the world of Big Brother, MasterChefs, etc. So that's really important for us. And then into Korea and China and places, it's scripted remakes. And again, it's big formats that seem to be resonating and getting those all remade as well. So the format business is very important for us in that region. And I think that's probably reflective of the shift in the region of local content for local broadcasters. And that pan world of all those pan channels, those US pan channels, has really receded over the last few years. Disney, I don't think, has got any linear channels there in the region. NBC have cut back, etc. So we see less of those big pan finished program sales, but much more in the format space as well. So that's a real focus for us there. And we have a lot of formats produced in lots of different territories there. So that's where we see growth there in that market for sure. Latin America is really interesting. We're extremely active in the region. We have several production companies in Mexico and production companies in Brazil. So they're very active there, commissions across scripted and the big entertainment formats in those territories. And then we at Banijay Rights handle all the formats in the rest of the region. So we have Survivor, Big Brother, MasterChef, Facebook sounds familiar, those type of formats across multiple territories as well. And then working with companies like Discovery and Warner's of finished programs of some of those formats. So you might get MasterChef Colombia, and then that will go on to Discovery Latin America. So we've got a really nice business of getting formats picked up and produced that we then might put in a second window and a third window even. So maybe go to a streamer and then onto pay TV. And that's a really good way of increasing these revenues around original production in a territory like Argentina or Colombia. Those are the sort of main ones we see that, or Chile, for example. So And we've also seen the growth there of the AVOD market. We've got an SVOD market. VIX is a good client of ours. Pluto's doing very well for us. Certainly in places like Brazil, where we're able to bring seasons of MasterChef Brazil, for example, onto an AVOD platform after the rights become available. And those do fantastically well. So local language, local production, then moving on to different windows is a really important area for us as well. So it's always challenging Latin America. There's always bumps in the road there, but we're really well placed there as a company and have been for many years. So we find it's a very exciting market and continue to find opportunities there.
Thank you. That is a great, amazing amount of information you managed to impart on what's going on in those places very quickly. So that's really
and Canada
fantastic
as well. We should mention.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do Canada,
because Canada's going through a lot of challenging times at the moment, and it's all sort of breaking out in the news as we've seen in the last month, which is going to continue to have headwinds in the territory. But to see Warner Brothers Discovery move all of their carriage deal agreements for all the channels they had with Chorus and some with Bell as well over to Rogers was a really seismic move, actually. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the territory there. I mean, Chorus definitely are moving away from, originals, and more acquisitions is going to happen there. And there seems to be lots of flexing of muscles, and there could be some real seismic changes there in the coming year in Canada in terms of how content's moving from one platform to another. And to see all these channels move across to Rogers has been, I think, caught a lot of people off guard, to be honest. So it's fascinating what's happening there. And it's a market which is going through a bit of a bumpy road at the moment, but I suppose we see opportunity when this happens. And but there's definitely some changes there at the moment going on. So Canada's a funny place. You get a piece of terrible news 1 hour, and then suddenly it spins into another phone call happens. It's like, okay, well then maybe there's, so it's, but we're definitely seeing that in English Canada. There's shifts taking place there for sure. In French Canada, which is a very important market for us, we are very heavily in there in our format business, and we have pretty much all our major formats: Survivor, Big Brother, MasterChef, and we've got some other big ones in discussions at the moment, and then some smaller ones that go on to some of the smaller channels there. But we're very, very, very active in that market as well. It's an important market for us. And it's quite nice because it sits outside the English part, so we can actually do a lot of format business there, which we can't necessarily do in English-speaking Canada because they rely on the simulcast to decide whether they even do a local version. But our simulcast business is very healthy there in Canada. We have The Summit, Deal or No Deal Island, MasterChefs, Lego Master, Big Brother. It's very active for us. In fact, all our network shows in the US are on or about to come on to the networks in Canada as well. So, but it's a fascinating market at the moment, and I think I have an executive there who's an absolute expert on the market, and I think her and I both agree that we probably haven't seen as much shifting as we've seen in the last few months, and we're expecting more.
Yeah. Okay, one to watch. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit now about AI, if you are up for that. Obviously everyone's talking about AI. We're starting to see, I think, some impacts on the TV industry, whether it's on things like AI powered content localization, things that can assist with editing of content. We're companies that are looking at kind of bringing in tech to use AI to automatically schedule channels, which is something that potentially is applicable to some of the fast channels, I think. But I'm sure there's probably a whole bunch of other things that Banijay broadly is doing with AI. I'm interested in kind of anything you can share on kind of how it's impacting your business now, and any other kind of observations you see on how it's impacting the industry, overall. And I appreciate that's a very big question and possibly enough to talk about an entire podcast. So over to you, Matt.
Discuss. Well, yes, I mean, we like everybody else are very actively looking at the opportunities with AI. And I think probably a top line response to your question is, and I think you touched on it well, actually, even at the initial of that question, is we really see the opportunities in process. How does it help our process? Process with editing. So we talked earlier on about self-publishing and clipping. There's definitely opportunities there. So, and it's how does it speed up our processes behind the scenes, as it were. So yes, we are actively looking and using it in some capacities already around that world. That how does it speed up, help us in terms of our digital world, etc. We've also, as a company, Banijay Entertainment, have sort of started tapping into using it, of tapping into our format archive and seeing AI help maybe identify old formats and what opportunities there might be with the vast catalogue that we have. However, I think at this stage, what we would really stress is that even though that will kick up ideas, etc., the creativity then flips to development, and that's people and that's teams. And we are still firm believers that the best ideas and the best development of shows, non-scripted, definitely. I mean, I don't think we're really looking at it in terms of a scripted sense, but non-scripted specifically, it can help, but we don't believe at this stage that AI is going to create the next big format. We don't necessarily believe that, but we feel it can help us enhance how our sort of internal processes that might identify areas that we can then go and create and produce and develop and produce ourselves. So we see it as helping, but we still firmly see the creativity as development from ourselves as people. I think the other area that we are conscious of is that you have to be careful of AI in terms of what's it mean for rights and IP ownership. And if it springs something up of creating something, well, who owns that? And how does that IP work in terms of rights and how we work as a business? And we have to look at that as a business. IP is the lifeblood of all of media's business. IP is really, really important. And for us, it's absolutely vital. The amount of IP that we own and really identify what IP we want to bring in. So there's question marks around AI about how does that help in terms of rights and ownership and all of that in the future as well. So we're very conscious of that, and it's something that we look into all the time. But it also goes back to creation of IP is important to us because of it's about ownership and rights and what that means for the future. And this podcast has been illustrative of how important IP is to any company, of how you can really use these new platforms and these new ways of getting media, of way of getting content out there, that ownership of the IP is absolutely vital to be able to have the content to do that. So all of that plays into how we feel about and the way we treat AI. But we are active in how it helps us process and how does it help us technically, and that's something which we continue to explore.
Yeah, and I think there are obviously, big questions, that are starting to be addressed about how, any IP owner, are models out there kind of utilizing your IP without you necessarily knowing to, and should you be, is that something you should be getting paid for? And I think everybody's just starting to figure that whole part of the kind of business model out.
And I don't think there's any solutions to that. I mean, there's examples of that in current media of people taking your clips off your shows and posting them on YouTube and full episodes. That happens all the time. It's what we call content claiming, which we're seeing. We see revenues from that, and if they're crossing over territories, we have the ability to get those taken down. So there is control, even though in the self-publishing world of the individual user around the world, there's still a control that we can, it's a bit of whack-a-mole, but we can either earn revenues from it or we can stop it. AI, and this is just me talking, this isn't the company talking, but this is like, who do you go to? Like, if that's the case, I mean, that just opens up, like, how do you go to stop that? Now, you can go to the platforms, I suppose, to say, well, this is not authorized, and you take it down. So there's that world. But I think I'm probably already sounding a bit ignorant by even describing that, because people will say, oh, it's far more sophisticated than that. So that
yeah, I don't think anyone's really kind of fully. I mean, I think people are starting to think about that, and there's some deals starting to be done, but I think we're really, really right at the beginning of kind of understanding what's happening there.
But of course, as a company, we are no different to any other sophisticated media company that is wanting to learn more, utilize it more, etc. But I think we still firmly believe the best shows are going to come from the creative community.
Yes, indeed. So that's been a really, really fantastic conversation, Matt. Thank you for your all the generous insights you provided. To finish off, could we look into the future a little bit more? And I'm interested in if you could give us a kind of summary of what you see 2025 looking like for Banijay and looking like for the industry overall. And maybe as part of that, you could also just kind of loop back to address the sort of point we started off talking about in the US market and, co-productions and how that's, are we at a kind of low point now and things are going to improve from where we are and 2025 is going to look a lot better? Or is it kind of it's too soon to tell?
I think it's too soon to tell, but I will leave on an optimistic note, because I think it's been a correction in the market, and both from original content, seeing the numbers of original suddenly go down for the first time in many years in the US. Well, co-productions fits into that as well. So it's not, but I do believe good shows will always break through, and there's opportunities here all the time. And I love the fact that I sit here after, I don't know, 20 plus years, 25 years doing this, and I'm invariably, I always laugh in the office because I'm wrong all the time, my predictions. So whatever I tell you is completely wrong anyway, Toby. But the industry has taught me not to be negative or cynical over a period of time. You have dips, of course, but not to be negative or cynical over time, because there's always something that pops through that surprises you and becomes a success. And it doesn't matter how challenged the market is, we see it all the time. It might be a controversial show. It might be a show that just catches light through word of mouth or whatever it is. That hasn't changed. So I think you've got to believe in shows you produce and shows you support and content you produce, etc. That there's always going to be opportunity. Now, some you will win, some you will lose. But I see 2025 continuing to sort of pick up. I think I see the co-production model actually beginning to grow some more teeth again, maybe in the next couple of years, because conversely, the original content and budgets being cut means that the co-production model is actually a very interesting model for people who want to present original shows still, which takes us back to how it all started at the beginning of the co-production sort of move around 2013, 14, 15, which was there was so much original content being presented to viewers and subscribers that they had to keep fueling it. And co-productions was a great way of putting content in that they dressed as an original, but actually was a co-production. So I kind of almost feel we've gone full circle, because we're going to go back to that for different reasons now, that it's a cost-effective way of producing amazing original content for co-production partners, which is premium, and the end viewer, subscriber doesn't know. So I always think that model is going to be interesting. Now, of course, shows need to be budgeted. It depends on budgets. Now, maybe there's going to be the odd show that's still of a certain budget, a much bigger budget. For those, we have to get a partner on board early on to underpin it. We're not going to necessarily take the risk on very, very big budgets anymore that maybe we did a few years ago, because it's just too risky, and we won't be the only people who do that. But maybe then then other shows, maybe the budgets just correct themselves slightly. I'm talking more out the UK, that budgets have been creeping up. Maybe the budgets need to, and they are being corrected slightly, which makes it a more feasible financial proposition for the producer, the original broadcaster, the distributor, and therefore finding a co-pro partner also is something which is more viable because the numbers aren't outrageous. So there's corrections going on as we speak, which maybe make the co-production landscape more nuanced and more doable in the future. So with all of that being said, as some doors have closed, I'm hoping other doors remain open, and I think there will still be opportunities. Of course, there will be. So I remain optimistic, but it's not the same as it was in the last few years, no question. But it's just, it will change a bit, and I think that's still okay. And we're still producing a huge amount of drama. We'll be launching multiple shows in the next 12 months, and actually all into 26, and we're still confident about those shows. And just as you wake up and you think, oh God, I'm not sure today, suddenly something pops. So I remain optimistic from that point of view. And I think on a wider basis of the industry, and certainly in the US in 2025, I think the world, it depends on the M&A activity. I think that's really what it comes down to. It depends on the M&A activity of, does that settle down, or are there going to be some seismic moves, and what those seismic moves mean ultimately? Because what the M&A activity does is it paralyzes their businesses, whatever they say publicly. And I don't mind saying this on the podcast, but it paralyzes their business. You've seen it at Paramount Global. You've seen it at Warner Brothers Discovery for the last 18 months, 2 years. The cuts they make internally has an effect, and that has an effect on decision making. It has an effect on budget, and it has an effect on how to even get responses, etc. And this M&A activity at the very top for shareholders is great if the companies get sold, etc. But the day-to-day for producers and distributors has become very hard. So I just hope that M&A activity settles down to a degree, because it makes business difficult.
Okay, well, let's hope it all gets everything gets sorted out quickly and settles down. But that's, I think, overall a kind of optimistic projection for 2025, which is great. So
yeah, we've got to be. There's shows being picked up and produced all the time, and I mean, we all do it. We all sit at home and we suddenly go, oh, so and so, we go out for a pint, and someone says, oh, have you seen this? And things catch light all the time, and that never changes. And that's why we all do this still, because there's amazing creativity out there, and creativity doesn't just stop overnight because there's challenges in the market, etc. And good ideas are going to come through. So I think we as a company and as individuals always feel excited about that, because that's our lifeblood, really. So yep, going to be positive.
Absolutely. So, Matt, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. It's really, really great insights you've shared. And I look forward to having you back on Inside Content at some point in the future.
In 4 years, Toby.
No, let's make it more. You should be a more regular guest than that, for sure. Thanks,
well, it's lovely
Matt.
to see you again. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Inside Content will be taking a short break during August, but we'll be back in September with lots of new exciting guests, as well as some special deep dive insight episodes. In the meantime, catch up on our past episodes with the likes of Samsung, Sky and BBC Studios, And be sure to sign up to our mailing list so new releases drop directly into your inbox along with other top insights from 3Vision.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content, the TV industry podcast brought to you by 3Vision. With decades of TV industry experience and real-world success, we know the ins and outs of the market like nobody else. To learn more about our TV consultancy services, head to 3vision.tv.